What if I told you that most of what you believe you know is simply not true? I'm not talking about information you've memorized. I'm talking about real understanding, about how things actually work. Do you know how to explain how a zipper works? A toilet? Your car's engine? And what about bigger things? How does the economy work? Democracy? The human brain itself? Most of us believe we understand much more than we actually do. And worse, the less we know, the more confident we feel. This is one of the most dangerous paradoxes of the human mind. A cognitive trap that keeps us imprisoned in illusion, and that shapes every decision we make, every opinion we defend, every certainty we carry. In this video, we're going to explore the illusion of knowledge, based on the classic book, The Knowledge Illusion, by Stephen Sloman and Philip Fernbach. You'll understand why your mind deceives you, how we live in ignorance disguised as wisdom, and what this reveals about who you really are. If you want to see beyond your own certainties and discover what your mind is hiding from you, stay until the end. This might be the most uncomfortable and transformative in reflection you'll have today. There's a psychological phenomenon called the illusion of explanatory depth. It works like this. You believe you understand something complex until you're asked to explain how it works, step by step. Then, suddenly, the words disappear, the certainties crumble, and you realize that what you called knowledge was in fact just a vague familiarity. Stephen Sloman and Philip Fernbach conducted fascinating studies on this. They asked people to rate how well they understood the functioning of common objects, bicycles, locks, toilets. People said they were confident. Of course, I know how it works. But when invited to explain in detail, the confidence vanished. The gaps were exposed and most admitted, actually, I don't know as much as I thought. This is the great trick of the human mind. It confuses familiarity with understanding, confuses recognition with real knowledge. And the most disturbing part, this doesn't just happen with objects, it happens with politics, economics, science, relationships, even with ourselves. But there's something even deeper happening here, something that Sloman and Fernbach discovered that completely changes how we understand human intelligence. The central thesis of the book is this: we underestimate our own ignorance and overestimate our individual knowledge, because most of our knowledge is not in fact inside us. It's distributed throughout society. It's in other people, and it's only accessible through collaboration. Think about this for a moment. You believe you know how to make coffee, but do you really? Do you know where the bean comes from? How it's cultivated, harvested, processed, roasted, ground, packaged, transported to your home? Do you know the chemistry behind extraction, the engineering of the coffee maker, the functioning of the electrical grid that powers it? No, you don't know. And you don't need to know, because that knowledge is distributed across thousands of people around the world, each specialized in a small part of the process. And here's the problem. You confuse access to this collective knowledge with personal knowledge. You think you know because you can make coffee, but actually you're just using an invisible chain of knowledge that other people built. This is what the authors call the community of knowledge, CAS, or the collective mind. The human capacity to accomplish incredible feats is not due to individual genius. It's due to our unique ability to share and accumulate knowledge collectively. No single human being could build an airplane, develop a vaccine, or create the internet. But together, collaborating, we become almost infinitely powerful. The problem is we forget this. We think using the minds and knowledge of other people, but we believe we're thinking alone. And here comes another uncomfortable truth: the limits of individual processing. Sloman and Fernbach argue that there are enormous limits to the amount of information a single individual can process and retain. Our reasoning capacity, isolated, is surprisingly shallow. We weren't made to understand everything. We were made to collaborate. Imagine trying to store in your mind all the knowledge necessary to survive in the modern world. It would be impossible. You'd have to know medicine, engineering, agriculture, economics, law, architecture, technology, biology, chemistry, physics. Nobody can. Not even geniuses. Not even specialists. And that's why we live in cognitive interdependence. The success of human society doesn't come from brilliant individuals who know everything. It comes from our ability to trust each other, to divide cognitive labor, to create external systems of information, like books, technologies, institutions, that store knowledge for us. You don't need to understand how your car's engine works. You need to trust the mechanic who understands. You don't need to master medicine. You need to trust the doctor who masters it. But here's the danger. When you don't know where your knowledge ends and where others' knowledge begins, you start to blur the boundaries. You start to think you understand economics because you read an article, that you understand health because you searched on Google, that you understand politics because you watched a debate. But you don't understand. You have access to fragments, to summaries, to opinions, and you confuse this with deep understanding. And then, armed with this false confidence, you make decisions, form opinions, judge, criticize, defend, all based on an illusion. The illusion that you know, when in fact, you're just repeating narratives you never stopped to question, using words you never stopped to define, defending ideas whose foundations you never examined. We live convinced that we know, but deep down, we're just navigating the surface of an ocean of ignorance that we can't even see. Socrates said, "I know that I know nothing." But what he really meant wasn't cheap humility. It was a warning, a recognition that true wisdom begins when we admit the extent of our ignorance. The problem is, our psyche doesn't like this. The human ego needs certainties, needs to feel it's in control, that it understands the world, that it has answers. Carl Jung would call this an ego defense against chaos. When reality is too complex, the mind constructs simplifications, creates mental maps that seem complete but are just rough sketches. And Nietzsche went even further. He said that people don't want the truth. They want comfortable illusions. They want to believe they know because doubt is unbearable. But here's the crucial point. This illusion isn't an isolated error. It's structural. It's part of how our mind works. Because the truth, the real truth, is this. You don't think alone. You never have. Everything you call your knowledge is in fact distributed. It's in other people, in books, in technologies, in social systems. You don't know how your cell phone works, but you use it every day, trusting that someone somewhere knows. You don't know how bread is made, from wheat to table, but you eat without questioning, because you trust the invisible chain of knowledge that sustains your life. And this is powerful, but it's also dangerous, because when we don't know where our knowledge ends and where others' knowledge begins, we start to blur the boundaries. We start to think we know everything, when, in fact, we know almost nothing. Think about the last time you had a heated argument. Politics, perhaps, or economics, or even about how to raise children. You had absolute certainty that you were right. You felt it in your chest, in your words, in your indignation. But now, calmly, answer. Did you really understand all the details of what you were defending? Or were you repeating something you heard, something you read in passing, something that makes sense to you? The illusion of knowledge doesn't live in grand theories. It lives in everyday life. It's in the guy who criticizes the country's economy but can't explain how inflation works. It's in the person who has a strong opinion about vaccines but has never read a single complete scientific study. It's in you when you defend an idea with passion without realizing that the foundation of what you believe is fragile, borrowed, incomplete. And the most frightening part, the more ignorant someone is about a topic, the more confident they tend to be. It's the Dunning-Kruger effect taken to the extreme, because when you know little, you have no idea how much you don't know. Ignorance is invisible to those who carry it. But when you start to study for real, when you dive deep, that's when you realize the vastness of the unknown, and blind confidence gives way to intellectual humility. But how many people reach that point? Most of us live on the surface, satisfied with shallow explanations, satisfied with the illusion. And here's the point of pain. This illusion is not harmless, it has real consequences. Deep ones. It shapes your choices, shapes how you vote, how you consume, how you judge others. It makes you believe you're right when you might be completely wrong. It makes you rigid, defensive, unable to listen, unable to change your mind, because changing your mind means admitting you didn't know, and admitting you didn't know means facing the fragility of your own ego. And the ego doesn't like that. It prefers the illusion, it prefers comfortable certainty, even if false. But here's the truth that few have the courage to face. You are much more ignorant than you imagine, and this ignorance is not your fault. It's part of the human condition. No one can know everything. No one can process the infinite complexity of the world. But the problem isn't ignorance itself. The problem is the illusion that you're not ignorant. Because when you think you know, you stop learning, you stop questioning, you stop growing, and then you become trapped. Trapped in your own certainties, trapped in the cave of your own mind. Until something, a crisis, a failure, a revelation, forces you to look at the abyss of what you don't know. So how do you escape this trap? It begins with something simple but extremely difficult. Admitting that you don't know as much as you think. Admitting that much of what you call knowledge is, in fact, borrowed confidence. And this is not weakness, it's strength, it's intellectual maturity. Because only when you recognize the extent of your ignorance can you begin to fill the gaps with truth. But there's more. There's something that completely changes how you relate to the world, the willingness to ask more and explain less. When someone disagrees with you, instead of defending your position tooth and nail, you ask, "Why do you think that? What am I missing?" Because real knowledge doesn't come from defending what you already believe. It comes from confronting what you believe with reality. And then you begin to realize something liberating. You don't need to know everything. Nobody does. The genius of humanity isn't in the individual mind. It's in the capacity to collaborate, to share, to build collective knowledge. But for this to work, you need to know where your limits are. You need to know when to trust experts, data, evidence. You need to have the humility to say, "I don't know, but I'm willing to learn." Because in the end, true intelligence isn't knowing everything. It's knowing what you don't know. It's carrying your doubts with the same dignity you once carried your certainties. It's understanding that knowledge isn't a destination, but a path, and that this path requires, above all, honesty with yourself. And here's something bigger. This illusion doesn't just affect you, it affects all of us. Collectively, we live in an era of inflamed opinions and shallow certainties, where anyone with internet access feels like an authority on any subject. Politics, science, health, economics, philosophy, and the result? Polarization, misinformation, narrative wars where no one is willing to listen because everyone thinks they already know. But the truth is, most of us are operating in illusion, defending positions we barely understand, repeating arguments we never stopped to question. And this is dangerous, because collective decisions, elections, public policies, social movements, are being made based on superficial knowledge. Imagine a world where people recognized their own limitations, where intellectual humility was valued as much as confidence. Imagine conversations where the goal wasn't to win, but to understand. Imagine leaders who said, "I don't know, let's find out together." This world is possible, but only if we begin to see our limitations. Only if we stop pretending we know more than we really know, because in the end, real knowledge isn't in having all the answers. It's in asking the right questions. Montaigne, centuries ago, already knew this. He said, "Nothing is so firmly believed as what we least know." Think about that. Think about how many of your deepest certainties are, in fact, unexplored territories. Think about how many times you defended an idea with fervor, without ever really investigating its foundations. Think about how many times you confused conviction with understanding. Because the illusion of knowledge is this: the belief that familiarity is sufficient, the belief that recognizing something is the same as understanding it. But it's not. Understanding requires effort, requires doubt, requires the courage to say, "I might be wrong." And perhaps, in the end, the greatest wisdom isn't accumulating answers. It's carrying questions. It's living with an open mind, always ready to be surprised. Because the truth, the deep truth, never belongs to those who are certain. It belongs to those who have the courage to doubt. So the next time you feel that absolute conviction about something, stop, breathe, and ask yourself, do I really know this? Or do I just think I know? Because maybe, just maybe, true intelligence isn't in having all the answers. It's in recognizing the vastness of what you still don't know. And in that recognition, in that humility, lies the beginning of something rare and precious: real wisdom. If this reflection touched you, if it made you think like the video, share it with someone who needs to hear this and subscribe to the channel. Your presence here helps spread consciousness, and consciousness today is what we need most. Until the next video, and remember, the journey of knowledge begins when you admit you don't know.